or civilian side.
You're being recorded.
Yep.
All right.
So start over. Charles Rodney Ward. I go by Rod. I'm currently a paramedic. I've been doing the EMS side of things on the civilian side for the last 3 years. But I also have 4 years of experience from the military, and that almost exclusively dealt with the trauma side of things. So like training on what to do with collapsed lungs, amputations, gunshots, burns, eviscerations, all that sort of thing, which definitely did help when it came time for paramedic school and what to do during the trauma sections. Let's see, joined the Marines back in 2007, got out in 2011 in December, waited until fall that following year in 2012. I went to Western. That's where I met Dr. Musser there in 2013. And then I've known him and worked in his lab in biology, got my BS in biology with 3 minors, psych, art, and chem, and all that good stuff. Did a lot of work with him, work independently in the lab. Been a good time, a lot of good experiences. Did a couple years of construction when I got out of Western, applied for med school and all that, and it's really, really tough nowadays, very difficult to get into that. And then I figured I'd just go ahead and get my boots or my feet wet, get on the ground floor and work my way up in the trenches, so to speak, because that's where I always did my best work. And I find you retain knowledge a lot better by doing the hands-on stuff, such as like going into EMS and then eventually applying to like, say, your master's, like PA school, or eventually a doctor, what have you. I think that's a better way of going off to higher education in terms of medicine, if that's your bag.
That sounds awesome. So I guess tell us what's a day in the life of a paramedic involved.
Well, you have two sides to it. You have the private side, and then you have the municipal side, which is like your fire departments, and those are run by the taxpayers. So private side, you show up for work, and pretty much as soon as you get to work, you might be hanging around for 5 to 10 minutes, checking out the vehicles and all that, getting everything ready, all your gear on board that you need for the day. But as soon as you're done, you're pretty much running and gunning. As soon as you're clocked in and you radio up, you're ready, they're sending you on calls. And with the private side, you're doing essentially hospital-to-hospital transfers, or hospital to nursing home transfers, or pick up at nursing homes, and then you're going to a facility like, say, dialysis. And once you start, you don't stop until you pretty much clock out. There's very little downtime. You're constantly driving everywhere and going. I mean, I had days where, because I work up in Wisconsin, it's all rural, where I had like 8 calls in a 24-hour period, but we drove 1,100 miles that day. On the flip side, if you go to the public side of things, like the firehouse, where I'm currently at right now, I'm getting anywhere from 1 to 5 calls a day. And it's like 10 minutes. Yep. Firehouse, fire department. Farthest you're driving, maybe 10 minutes during your normal calls. And then given your protocols, everywhere's different, but pretty much it's like 25 minutes maximum drive time to the nearest hospital, depending on the severity of the injuries or what's going on with the patient. You might drive a little bit farther if that's the patient's choice and all that, and it's not severe, but those are not the norm. And with those, as I was saying, that's 1 to 5 calls per day at the fire department. And you have a lot more time to actually have time to go and like cook dinner, work out, but you're always doing something while you're on shift, like keeping the hoses clean if you're dual certified for fire, or making sure the ambulances are always restocked, going over protocols, new protocols from the hospitals and the medical directors. For new people who come in, making sure they're up to snuff and know what they're doing with devices such as the Lucas device, which for those who don't know what the Lucas is, it's a godsend. You know, back when someone went down for full cardiac arrest, you'd be over there doing chest compressions. And, you know, even me, I go to the gym 3 to 4 times a week. I'm almost back down to my 3-mile time of 20 minutes. I'm in pretty good shape, but even me, after doing 1 full round of chest compressions for 2.5 minutes, it feels like a half hour. You get tired. And if you get tired, you're not doing good chest compressions and the person could die. The Lucas, that device, pretty much you get it strapped in around the person's chest, set it down, the little pump right over their chest, and it automatically does perfect chest compressions every time, which is also good because now you're not getting tired, and that frees up one more person to say, get a line going into their vein to go ahead and administer meds, draw up meds, start an IO, which is a needle into the bone, which is part of the protocols. I mean, it's really good. It's a great device.
That sounds cool. So if somebody wanted to get into being an EMT or paramedic, or however the steps are, I know EMT is kind of the catch-all phrase, right?
It is.
That you're saying? And then there's different stages. So could you just briefly talk about the different stages of paramedics and training and approximately how long it takes for each step?
So EMTR is the very most basic one. That one only lasts like one semester. And for that one, all you have to do is pretty much it's CPR. That's all it is. And then after that, one's like one semester. Yep, emergency. So EMT stands for Emergency Medical Technician, and R, it just stands for responder. Pretty much, you know how to do CPR, and that's about it. You know, cops, fire departments, that's pretty much a requirement no matter where you go. Next level would be your basic, and that one is pretty much they can go ahead and like in their scope of practice is they can go ahead and do like check your blood sugar on a patient. They can help administer medications that are prescribed to the patients. So like if they're going to anaphylaxis and they have an EpiPen, they can help them administer the EpiPen. Same with like the nitroglycerin tablets. If it's just prescribed to the actual patient, they can go ahead and help the patient, you know, take them, given their cardiac episode that's going through. But that's pretty much the gist of it. You know, take blood pressures, temperatures, basic stuff. The next level is your advanced or intermediate. It's pretty much synonymous, same thing. And those you see in the more rural settings. So like up where I'm at in Wisconsin, they have a ton of those. But where I currently live out there in like McHenry County, Lake County, Cook County, they don't have that anymore because it's all heavily populated city and there's no need for the intermediate. And those ones, they can go ahead and start IVs. The biggest difference is they can start IVs and they can go ahead and do a 12 lead, which essentially a 12 lead is when you hook a person up to the monitor when they're having a cardiac episode, it will go ahead and take a picture of what the electrical activity of the heart is doing, and they can go ahead and transmit it to the hospitals, but they're not ready to, you know, they can interpret it if they know what they're doing, but they're not going to take their word as bond because they're technically not trained for that. And then your highest one is your paramedic, which is what I am. And we pretty much do it all from starting IVs to running meds, doing the 12 lead, interpreting the 12 lead, seeing what the heart is doing, and then go after that. You know, do they need to get juiced? Or I'm sorry, when I say juiced, I mean like shocked to essentially restart their heart so they can go back to normal rhythm. Give them meds to go ahead and do the same thing with the heart, slow it down if it has to be. You know, doing splints, stopping heavy hemorrhages like amputations, that sort of thing. So we pretty much do it all. And then after paramedic, there's like one course you could take. It's critical care. That one's not needed for anything except for private side. And that's pretty much like you live out there in Madison, Wisconsin, but you need to go down to like Loyola, Chicago. So you're talking like a 4-hour drive time where you need a paramedic and this person's on like medications and fluids where, you know, given how they're, you know, because 4 hours, a lot can happen. And in this case, the whole reason is they're able to go ahead and titrate the medicines to either increase the dosage or decrease it based on the body's reacting in terms of the vitals. And they can pretty much run the pumps and what they call a ventilator. And for me, I'm not critical care, but I am advanced scope. So the only difference between advanced scope and critical care is a semester-long course, and you have to go to a college to do that. Advanced scope just means you get trained up on how to run the pumps, which automatically run the fluids and the medications as the patient's, you know, going through it. And I know how to work the ventilator.
So, and you told me you're also getting some training in the fire department side of things too, because you work in a firehouse on
Correct.
the weekends. You know, so so you're learning like the basics of how, obviously it's not quite there yet, but how to be a fireman, also a fire person, excuse me, whatever the term is.
Pretty much.
So could you tell us, like, maybe how do you deal with the stress of some of the calls? You told me some of it can be pretty gruesome, and then some of it
Correct.
can be kind of joyous, like you delivered a baby, you said.
That
And
is
so that
also
might have been,
correct.
so can you give us kind of a little bit of a lowdown on how do people adapt to that, or is that something you can adapt to, or some people can't, or what maybe, or maybe just an example of some of the things you might have seen?
Well, given my background, like I'm actually fifth generation Marine. My mom and my mother and father are both Marines. We're all Marines in my family. So I was definitely raised to the beat of a different drummer. So when it comes to really severe trauma like death, like I've seen a lot of it in my life. To me, it's like a water off a duck's back because I've been around it my entire life. I've seen it and I know how to deal with that sort of thing. But then you have others, it's like people who like join like army just to get the college benefits or something like that, or they join it for like the glory and all that. Mentally, they're usually not prepared for that sort of thing. So like a lot of these situations, like my uncle, he's a police officer out in Gurnee. They were trying to go ahead and gauge his mettle if he's really ready for the job. So on his first call, there was a guy who got ejected from his vehicle for not wearing his seatbelt. But in this guy's case, his neck got caught on the actual windscreen, the windshield, and it degloved him. And for those who don't know what degloving is, essentially degloving is named after, pretty much your hand, like when the skin gets caught in something and it all gets ripped off, showing skin's ripped off like a glove. And in this guy's case, his from the neck up, he was degloved. And they told my uncle, like, hey, Gomez, go collect that guy's face. So, and that was like the very first call he had as a police officer out in Gurnee. So it can be pretty gruesome if you're not ready for that. If you're joining for any selfish reasons, like the glory, to get free drinks at the bar, that sort of thing, you're going to be like these instructors who, do all these years and eventually, end up getting really bad habits, like serious drinking problems, like an instructor I had where his 4-year-old son knew his favorite beer. This is a 4-year-old, but knew his dad's favorite beer. And, when you have situations like that, you might have a problem because alcoholism is really, really bad, especially in this line of work. You start getting drunk, you show up hungover, you're not going to be able to take care of patients effectively. You're going to make mistakes and you might end up doing prison time. Because at the paramedic level, you're dealing with narcotics and real funky medicines, like adenosine is a medicine we use for SV or supraventricular tachycardia, SVT. And essentially what it does is it stops your heart for 6 seconds. So if you do too much of it or you don't do it properly, the heart can still keep beating super fast. And next thing you know, they're going to like VTAC or ventricular tachycardia where they can go to cardiac arrest and die, or too much. And now the next thing you know, you gave too much to the heart where they can't go ahead, like with amiodarone, you give too much to them and they're alive. The next thing you know, same thing, you're stopping their heart. So, you have to find good coping mechanisms, eat pretty healthy, be at the firehouse. I can eat really healthy now because I actually have time to cook. And we actually have a gym there to work out. Finding people who work in your field to go ahead, people have been there for like 10, 15 years to talk to for different things that you have issues with is a great way to go ahead and deal with what you might be feeling because you might have experienced, like the death of a child or an adult or a friend. Going to the gym regularly, like that's what I'm going to be doing here after this meeting eventually, going to the gym. Pets are great, having something there, I'm not sure if you guys know like people in your life who've been suicidal, but people who I've known, I was getting ready to pull that trigger, but I just thought, what about my dog? Who's going to take care of my dog? So having other mediums and people in your line of work to talk to is excellent for dealing with the stress. Like when I did my tour at Lurie's Children, that particular day, we actually had 2 children that died. The first one was from a hit and run out there in the suburbs, and the parents were lucky in that the oldest brother, the 8-year-old, took the brunt of the impact from the drunk driver hit and run, shielded the younger brother. So then that night, the younger brother, who did go home with bruises and scrapes, did live. And they did catch the guy the next day, which is nice. And he's currently being arraigned for prison time as the justice system crawls. And then about an hour and a half later was a little infant, 8-month-old little Kason. And he ended up pretty much, they brought the priest in to read him his last rites because in this case, when they did the CT scan, his bladder was the size of his brain and his ribs were all broken, but in multiple stages of healing. And this kid was a goner, and pretty much
the second baby syndrome, I think you're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is
and
an abuse case.
Later. Yeah, the mother pretty much beat the kid and all that frustration because the dad was always gone at work. Don't really know the specifics, but I know it was her that did it. And yeah, it's pretty gruesome, especially if you think about it. If you want to go to like pediatrics and sort of that sort of thing, and if you're in the big city where all the jobs are at, just remember, you don't go to the hospital when you're feeling fine. And when you're in a big one like Lurie's Children Chicago, you're going to see a lot of people, and you're going to see more and more of that. Whereas like where I'm at right now, where it's very, very rural, we don't get, like I said, a lot of calls, but we definitely get a lot of the weird, rare ones. Like we actually had a guy who did go into cardiac arrest, and we brought him back, and the guy I was working with, he's like, I've been on for 15 years, and this is the 3rd guy I've had that did come back as a zombie. Because most of the time when you bring a guy back, or a woman back, bring anyone back, I should say, usually they don't know how long the person's been down. But in this case, as soon as he went down, they're doing chest compressions in like 40 seconds, and we were there in like 3 minutes, and we essentially shocked them. And the quicker the response time, the better chance you have of surviving. And that was just super rare because the guy said he's been out for 13, 15 years, and this is the 3rd time he's had a guy, no kidding, walking and talking. And we actually joke about that one because he happened at a Culver's of all places. And my buddies are like, that's the most Wisconsin thing I've ever heard of. A guy getting so mad that Culver's messed up his order that he had a whole full-on heart attack because they didn't give him a large cheese curds. And that actually came from...
Yeah, I remember you telling me about that. So he was in the drive-through and got pissed off and ended up in a heart attack. But you saved it, sounds like.
Yeah, well, not only us, but the lady who worked at Culver's, she's just, essentially she's not even a medic or anything. It just shows, what knowing CPR can do, because she's not an EMT, she's not a paramedic. She just knew CPR, and by her doing CPR within 40 seconds, saved this gentleman's life. Oh. And then obviously us getting there and giving him meds and, shocking the heart to go back to normal rhythm definitely improves it as well. But, the best thing you can do is CPR.
Oh.
So and then the other rare call we had 5 days later was we birthed a child in a house.
Oh, that's awesome. How was that experience?
Our dispatchers are great on the public side of things, so they gave us the 411 of what was going on. For those who are young and don't realize, 411 was a thing you would dial on your phone to get callback information. Nowadays, a cell phone, tells you who's calling, but back in the day, that's 411 was information. Back before we had the internet and cell phones. Anywho, we get there, we could hear her, as soon as we parked on the street, we could hear her screaming from the inside of the house. And we're thinking, it's pretty painful. And we get in there, we're getting all the information, first, second child, blah, blah. And, it's her second child and all that. How far along is she? She's going to be due in about a week. So we go in there, and she's in the bathroom, and she's on her back, and she's obviously in pain. And we help to reposition her to all fours, because by doing that, it helps to relax the pelvis, which did take the pressure off a lot of the pain. And so we're just like, okay, let's just take a quick look and see how it's going. And he's crowning. So we're like, we're going to do this here. So we went from getting ready to get her on the cot, the stretcher, to take her to the hospital, to we already have everything that we need right there because we have a whole crew of like 5 people, a couple more, and so just started passing everything around to get the OBGYN kit ready and the clips, the clamps, the scalpel, and all that, and yeah. So she was only in labor like from the time her water broke to when we delivered the child right there, 40 minutes.
Wow. So you're saying for just to let everybody know, the paramedics would make 25 to 35 an hour, more or less. Is that in this kind of area?
So if you go like in the public side of things, public you might be making anywhere from like 22 to like 28. It all depends on the certifications you have and all that. Having like fire cert and advanced things, definitely they tack on like an extra $1 or $2 an hour, and it does pay less than the private side. But the trade-off is, like I said earlier, private side, you might be running anywhere from like 300 to 1,000 miles a day, not including the patient pickups and drop-offs. Whereas the public side, 1 to 5 calls a day, and we actually sit down to eat dinner, actually have time to work out, actually have time to use the restroom, or change your socks, which if you're working a 24-hour shift, I cannot recommend how important it is to change your socks at least a couple times during the shift. Believe me, your feet will thank me later. I'm sure Doc Musser there can go ahead and reiterate that fact since he was Army as well. Take care of your feet.
Yeah. So I'm just going to see if any students have any questions and would like to speak loudly, and we'll see. Yes.
How long have you had the Lucas device at your department?
Well, that's the thing. I just started this particular department a couple months ago, but they've had it for at least a good couple of years now.
Yes, ma'am.
So you said you were in rural medicine, right?
Say again?
You're in rural medicine, not in the city?
You're in the rural countryside now.
I've done both the city and the rural, because when I was doing my paramedic, I was actually out where I live, and I actually did all my times and my training out in Cook and Lake County, and everyone knows that Cook County is Chicago, not fun. And then Lake County is obviously Gurnee, which is a huge population out there as well.
So what was your question?
So which would you rather prefer then, the rural medicine or the city medicine?
I prefer rural, because with the city, the problem is with the city, as I was telling, there's a lady at the fire department, and she was going over to Milwaukee because they had a program, it's a 2-year program where she gets her EMT. Well, she's going to be relearning EMT basic, but they do your EMT basic, your paramedic, your fire 1 and fire 2 in 2 years, which definitely shaves up a lot of time, but there's a lot of cramming. And her dad was there cooking dinner for the department, their goodbye and all that. And he's like, yeah, she's going to be getting a lot of calls. And I'm like, well, sir, it's not the quantity, but the quality. And I was like, when I was doing my ride time out in Cook and Lake County, like, yeah, every blue moon we'll get like a gunshot in, or someone severely hemorrhaging from like a rollover. But most of the time it's like an elderly person who's being neglected, or feels neglected, and they're calling up because they're lonely, or usually most of the time it's like a diabetic person who took either too much insulin or not enough, and now you're going there and you got to do okay, why are they acting weird with what we call AMS, altered mental status, because that could be from a wide variety of things that can cause that. And you're asking, hopefully someone's there to tell you, like, oh yeah, they're diabetic, and first thing you do is you take a blood sugar, like, oh look, they have a blood sugar of 60, let's bring that back up to 100 where it should be at. And next thing you know, they come out of their comatose zombie-like staring state. So like that's most of the calls you get in the city. It's very routine, same thing over and over again.
Okay.
Whereas in rural, like I said, in 5 days we had 2 of the one of the rarest calls, like full cardiac arrest, where he came back and it was actually talking to us actually en route. And that was kind of funny because he kept saying, unplug me. And this was after we shocked him. And then the other one being, we birthed a child. Like when I was out at Gurnee doing my ride time out there were dudes who are there for like 20, 25 years, never birthed a child. And here I am on this new department literally within 5 days of each other, my first month of being there, 2 super rare calls. And that's why I'd say I prefer rural, because it's not the routine thing. It's always different. So it keeps you on your toes. It keeps you knowing your protocols. You don't get lethargic. You don't get lackadaisical. You're always thinking.
And probably just a little more, sounds like you got a little bit more time just to be a little downtime that's needed to be able to deal with the next issue versus just constantly running. It's kind of the impression I get
totally.
too.
I mean, if you're doing, like I said, 800 miles a day, you and your partner, yeah, you're driving like an hour and a half to the next time, but
Then
you're both busy. You're getting stuff restocked. You're thinking, where do you want to eat? Because you don't have time to eat. You're looking at your maps, just trying to find something to eat. When you get to where you're going to, or coffee. The other guy's sitting there driving, so he's focused on that instead of thinking about, like, what happened with that call? What could I have done different? What can I do different next time? How can I improve myself? Or if it's someone who is starting to tank, when I say tank, like they're going down the drain, what would I do in this scenario?
Rod, you got another question or two. I'm gonna go ahead and get them. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
And then you'll be next after. Go ahead.
So, in general, why did you want to be a paramedic?
I've always been into the human body and anatomy. As I told you earlier, I got my BS in biology and all that. I was thinking med school, but just certain quotas and all that has made it very difficult for me to go ahead and get into that. Plus, college back when I was young, from 05 to 07, I just didn't really take it serious. I had a lot more maturing to do, which is why I went in the Marine Corps. And nowadays with technology, everything's all compressed to one thing. So pretty much college from 15 years ago was hindering my ability to get into like med school or PA school now. So I just figured, the best way to do it is just work from the ground up and, prove my worth, prove my mettle, and then eventually go into it, if I choose to 5-10 years from now.
One thing also about Rod is he's always told me he's interested in emergency medicine. So I think it's a natural for him to want to be a paramedic versus maybe being in the lab, like in what I'm saying, looking at urine samples or something. You've always been more interested in hands-on deal with the emergent stat issue is what I recall. Would that be fair to say?
I've always loved it. I've always had a knack for it, and like the earlier thing I was saying, people go in this for the glory or the accolades and all that, I'm more of like the stoic type where I've been tried and tested in these terrible situations that come out relatively unscathed. I know how to handle the severe stress, and the way I've seen, it's better that I to go into this and take it upon myself to do this because I know I can handle it, rather than let somebody else do it who won't be able to do it and probably falter and end up quitting or doing something drastic later on.
What you have a question, ma'am?
Okay, so my question is, can you talk a little bit about your experience pre-COVID to post-COVID and how that affected your job with the hospitals not having beds or ventilators and being overflowed?
Did you have a pre-COVID experience? Did you work pre-COVID and then you do it post-COVID?
Life was a lot easier before COVID. We didn't have all the masks and the gowns and all that stuff. And it just made life a lot easier. Like, you would obviously go ahead and don appropriate PPE for cases of people who have like something called C. diff, which is a Clostridium difficile. It's along the lines of that. It's a bacterium, and it's highly contagious, but it only comes out in the fecal matter, which is why you would go ahead and don your PPE, because you definitely don't want that. Essentially, you can actually die pretty quickly from C. diff contracting, because it turns like all your bowels into just diarrhea, just coming out forcefully from the back end. And you can definitely tell someone has C. diff because it's a smell you'll never forget. So that was pretty much the only time we done PPE before the whole COVID. And then afterwards, the initial after effects was everyone was getting scared, like the whole HIV scare of like the 80s, where everyone's like freaking out, like, don't use the public toilet seats and all that because you can get HIV. And same thing with the whole COVID, like, don the PPE everywhere you go, head to toe, everything, just wear it so you don't get it. And then, like in my case, I got COVID. I didn't realize it. I just had a little more mucus than usual. And the only people that are really affected by it are those who already have comorbidities, most notably obesity. But then again, people with obesity usually they're already on borrowed time and all that, because the thing you gotta remember with the human body is that, sugar is like used, obviously for everything, and your brain can only use sugar. It can't use any other means of energy production. And diabetes pretty much keeps it from you able to process sugar properly. So if you don't have enough insulin or too much insulin, whatever's going on, sugar can't be processed in the brain. And without your brain, everything goes downhill fast. And not to mention your other organs and tissues and all that. Same thing. So like obesity, it throws everything out of whack. And it's why, those people don't live as long as those who don't have it. So COVID usually, I've seen, and, the CDC, you can look it up, the people most heavily affected by COVID and die from it are those that are very, very old. And usually when you're really old, you're immunocompromised, and those with obesity.
It sounded like the biggest thing was you were just constantly having to don a lot more gear than was comfortable and probably having to go through a lot more steps to get into a hospital or out or take a patient or pick up a patient, I'm guessing.
It is. And, the whole scare and all that and the politics and all that have really ruined a lot of things. Because I had, back when I was private side, like I said, private side, you do a lot of nursing home visits, either dropping them from the hospital off to the nursing home, going to the nursing home and going to dialysis. So, you get to see a lot of these people, and there's a lot of them. There was one lady, I remember, she was at her grandson's wedding in like May of that year, and she was totally with it. She was only there because she couldn't quite stand up all the way, but because of the lockdowns and procedures, she couldn't see her friends, families, and loved ones anymore, maybe through the window, but that's it. But the lack of human touch and just talking to someone all the time, they went from visiting her like twice a week to like once a month because of the procedures. And, that following November, I was taking her to hospice. And for those who don't know what hospice is the comfort care before you die. So I was taking her to this facility to die. So she went totally with it to just a shell, a vegetable, and just gave up the will to live. And people not being able to go ahead and visit their, go to the funeral homes for like funerals and all that, can't even hug their mother without getting scolded, because of COVID. It's just been ludicrous.
Does anybody have an additional questions? Yes.
And
You
on
next
that
to
one,
next.
that one thought, you go to any ER, you go to any hospital, especially in the ER, you walk in there, because I have access to that, obviously, and you just walk into the ER, you just see the nurses station, and you just see the doctors and the nurses, their masks are all pulled down, they're smoking and joking, having a good time, telling jokes, eating food and all that. And, that just shows you like they're right there at the forefront, and they, even they're tired of all this.
Okay, what's your question, sir?
So when it comes to like your hours you work or like how long your shifts are, so what, like when you're on the private and on the public side, like how long were your shifts and how many hours a week were you working?
So at my last private, I was working, I signed up for 72 hours a week. So I was working essentially 3 24-hour shifts, but I was working probably with, because of layovers and holding me back, 80 hours a week, probably longer. And that's just the way private side works. You're pretty much a cog in the machine, and there's no care. And I got some thoughts on that. You don't want to hear it. Well, you probably do, but not super polite conversation, so to speak. But with the private side, you could do a 24-hour shift, you could do a 12-hour, you could do an 8 or a 10. It all depends on the need. At the fire department, they had different things. Like me, because I live like an hour away from the fire department, so I could sign up for like a 12-hour shift or a 24. And then once I get my Fire 1 cert, I'll be working 48-hour shift. But the way that works, it's 2 days on, 4 days off. And it might like a lot, but you got to remember, if you're running 1 to 5 calls a day, and one call takes you like an hour at the most, so that's not a lot of time you're actually working and driving around in 48 hours. So there's a lot of downtime. You're gonna be totally rested.
I'll go to you, then you next. Sir, what was your question?
How many car accidents have you had to deal with?
He wants to know kind of how many car accidents have you been a part of this patient pickup or on the scene, kind of, so to speak, if you can guesstimate?
So far, in the last year, I'd say about a dozen. I don't know, 1 to 2 dozen. Doesn't happen very often. And usually when they do, it's usually like somebody, the light's turning, it's going from yellow to red, and the dude's trying to turn left, and the guy's trying to speed in from the opposite direction, and next thing you know, they hit each other, and it's usually like 30 miles an hour or less. It's usually, the car accidents usually happens like 30 miles an hour or less, and because of the great technology we have with the crumple zones and the airbags and all that, most of the time, I'd say about 90, 95% of the time, the people are actually walking away. They're actually signing on what we call AMA, which means against medical advice. And pretty much it's just saying that I've been evaluated, I've been told what's going on, I've been told the opinion of the qualified medical personnel, in this case me, and they recommend what I should do. In this case, go to the hospital for further evaluation. They have, obviously better technology and machines to go ahead and do a full body scan, but I'm choosing not to go. I'm either going to go there on my own accord, blah, 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 or I'm going to go ahead and just go home. And I've been advised that if I feel any worse, go ahead and call us up. We'll come right on out. But against medical advice, I'm going home. And that's most of the car accidents because great technology. People aren't, hitting their heads and going through the windscreen, and they're not getting impaled from like steel A-frames, any of that stuff. They're not getting into huge rollovers, and those are very, very far and few in between. Car accidents, like I said, out of that 1 to 2 dozen ones we actually transported to the hospital because it was that serious. I think 2 or 3.
Ma'am, did you have a question?
Yeah. What are the most important skills for a paramedic to have?
What are the most important skills for a paramedic to have?
I would say probably the ability to work well under pressure. That's probably one of the most important ones, and critical thinking.
Do many people stay in a career for 20 years or 30 years, or is that usually just a 5 or 10 year stint for most? 'Cause I figure this
I think
burnout.
I think the ones who experience the burnout the most are probably the ones, like I said, that went in it for the glory and all that, and it's not what they expected. But those who have altruistic qualities, like God and country and all that, family, and just the stoicism for the sacrifice, they don't tend to get burned out, and they tend to stay in this, for life, 20, 30 years, and usually flourish. And
You have another question?
I know I've been talking quite a bit on like the whole private side, but there's a certain quality of life that you get and accomplishment you feel and stories you get from the private side. Like I had one lady, she was 101 years old, and she was going to a facility because she could stand up almost all the way, but just couldn't quite stand up all the way anymore. And like her mind was sharp as a tack. And what happened was she was born out right one town over where I'm at, in Woodstock. And what's cool about her, she was telling me that she and her husband were both born in the same house. And what happened was way back in the day, before there was hospitals out here, doctors made house calls. And the husband's parents had bought the house in Woodstock where he was born. A few months later, they sold the house to her parents where she was born. And then they both went to high school, fell in love, got married, went off to war and all that. And then they bought the house off of her parents where they raised their family. And, with these longer drive times, in the private side, like 30 minutes, sometimes an hour, you get a chance to actually talk to the people, and you get cool stories like that, 101 years old, married for like 80 years, and they were both born in the same house. And like for the military veterans, I actually transported a guy. He was the cook at one point. He was a Navy guy, and he was the cook for General Douglas MacArthur, World War II. And there's another gentleman I did. He was a Marine grunt during Korean War, and he was there at the Chosen Frozen, actually served under Chesty Puller.
Wow.
private side, you can get really, really cool stories so long as you're actually interested in people and you sit there and you talk to them. Just don't be like the guy that just sits in the captain's chair, that's the one behind the page, and just sit there and just start doing your paperwork and don't interact with the people, because now you're ignoring them, you're not keeping up their vitals. If you're talking to them and all of a sudden they start declining and start, mispronouncing words, it's like, oh, they might be having a stroke.
We got another question for you.
I remember you saying you were gonna be going, you're gonna be trying to go to medical school in the future. What is your end goal profession?
End goal profession? Well, I'd say the next step that I would do is probably the government contractor. So going back as a paramedic attached to the military unit is probably the next one. And as soon as I get to that, I'll probably doing that one for probably life. But
You mentioned physician assistant too. That's
after that, either physician assistant or the MD or OD route.
yeah. So the DO. So the one thing about becoming a physician assistant is you have to have a lot of experience, right? So you're getting that experience if you wanted to be a physician assistant. You can't just walk into physician assistant, even though it's a 2-year program, they expect you to have had hundreds of hours of real medical experience, right? So.
And definitely, like, if you get like paramedic before going that route, definitely helps, because like one of the guys I work with, he actually used to be he was a tech on the cardiac floor for like over a decade. So now that the guy's a paramedic, like he does all the stuff that's heart related. He's like proving doctors wrong, just haven't worked there for over a decade and looking and listening and see what's going on. But he posed me a question like, okay, this guy's been in atrial fibrillation, for the last 2 or 3 days. That's not as normal. And atrial fibrillation means you're getting, your heart starts when the electrical thing, it starts and the one node, it travels down. Well, atrial fibrillation, it doesn't just start at that one node, it starts all over the atria, which means different parts are fired at different times. It's usually a rapid heartbeat. So just like critical questions he asks, like, why would you not want to go ahead and give that guy meds and just, if he's stable, ride it out to the hospital? Reason being, if he has like a heart rate of like 160 high, and now you slow it down, the AFib, by having it go faster in all the different areas is causing turbulence, and blood cells don't like turbulence. They tend to lyse and explode, and that's what causes the clotting factor normally, like when you cut your arm. So if you slow it down, instead of being pushed against the wall, now it's actually to float out a little bit and possibly go into the ventricles, and actually now you're going into a pulmonary edema, or not edema,
But one thing I wanted to, sorry to interrupt you, but I was thinking, just to kind of end up on that one point out, is you talked about maybe you want to work as a government contractor, as a paramedic, so you'd be like a private sector working with the military force. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yes, that's correct.
What's that entail? How do you get into that kind of line of business?
So back when we had the huge troop numbers and all that, like say of 08, 09, any guy who's like a paramedic and a civilian could go ahead and go into that, and they would train you up. But now with the drawdowns and just the way that things are right now, and that we're our lowest numbers ever, pretty much only taking people that are former military with weapons training and have the paramedic certifications and all that to get into it.
And would you be in the private sector attached to? Okay, would that be through like one of those military private companies? Or is it
for like the older people, like Blackwater is one of them, but nowadays it's like Triple Cappy, Constellus, Janus.
okay.
But yeah, so you're pretty much a civilian and you're attached to a military unit as a liaison. And the reason why they have that is because say you need 50 troops to go ahead and rate an Army medic or Navy corpsman. Well, if you have a detachment of like say 15 personnel in like Mogadishu, they would not rate a corpsman, but they're out there in the middle of the third world and all that, and they're going to need medical assistance, and that's the role of the government contractor.
Does anybody have a burning question to ask? Yes, sir.
So when it comes to paperwork, when you're doing paperwork, how important is it to like not leave out any details, like when it comes to like stabbing, shootings, domestic abuse, like stuff that you would respond to?
Keep your eyes open, keep your eyes open and your ears peeled and document everything. By being like, like if I'm assuming you guys are like in the science racket and going through biology and all that, and you realize that it's very meticulous. You have to do like when you're doing your lab experience, you have to do it this way, especially like with chemistry. You got to do it these steps this way, this amount every time. Especially if you want to go ahead and like replicate, you come with a breakthrough like procedure. If you can't replicate it, well, it's essentially just wasting your time and your money and all that, and it can't be replicated, and you're just promoted as a hack. It's the same thing with this. You have to be super meticulous with everything that's going on, like with like a stabbing, a gunshot wound, anything, I mean, you have to document everything. Okay, where was he? You can't just say he was shot in the stomach. Like, where was he shot at? Like, he was shot 3 inches off the paramumbilicus to the patient's right. That sort of thing. And like, if you notice the exit wound, like, oh, okay, the exit wound was. What's up?
Oh, I was just mentioning to the class, we have 3 more minutes. So you.
But that way, if
Guess,
you get called in for like court and it gets brought up, it shows that you know what you're doing. You can't get in trouble. And they like the person says, well, they did this, and you have it documented. Like, well, no, actually, we administered this at this time. It just saves you in terms of litigation and all that. And it can also help when you drop them off the hospital, like an emergency situation. Like, yeah, we saw the gun, we saw entry or the bullet hole right here, and another one over here. So now they know, okay, the bullet exits the person, so they don't have to go fishing for it, and they can look and see the trajectory. Okay, what might have been hit.
So we're down to our last 2 minutes. Do you want any final words of wisdom that you would give to freshman biology students, pre-med type students that can be summed up in a minute? And if not, you don't have to worry too much. I'm putting you on the spot. I know they're getting a little
I would say,
antsy.
you go out and have fun and all that, don't, have too much fun and get in too much trouble, but make sure you keep up with your studies, you work hard, you be diligent, don't neglect to hit up the gym and keep in good shape, because, that's one of the longevity of life is staying in good shape, but also keeping your mind sharp and always, thinking and always advancing and always trying to improve yourself. Never become stagnant, because complacency does kill.
Well, if on that great note, could everybody give a round of applause for you did great.
And if you guys have any more questions, just get with Dr. Mustard. He can give you my email, shoot me an email. And if you want, I can come on for more Q&A at another time.
Sounds awesome. Thank you so much. Everybody have a nice day, and thanks so much for coming out here or talking with us.
Good luck with your studies and good luck with your semester.
Thank you, sir. You have a good one. It'll be online. Yep. Thank you so much.
Okay, so
And
you
I'll-
wanna update that?
Yeah,
When will the homework be unlocked again?
I'll go on in this afternoon.
And then, for the notes that we took, do you want them in a paragraph form or bullets?
For notes, bullets is fine too, but all right, thanks again. I'm gonna go ahead and let you go. And we'll visit sometime online. Take care, man. Thanks for everything.
You too. Like I said,
Hey,
good luck
Todd.
with your fall.
Appreciate it. You have a good one. I'll talk to you later.
Yep, Godspeed.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
I said it literally. Makes you sound guilty. I don't care, bro.